This is Sean with TWA Stories. I'm here with Larry Myers. Larry, how you doing today?
Doing good.
All right, so we're going to save some stories about your experiences with the organization, and we got to kind of start from the beginning. Where were you born?
I was born in Crawfordsville, Indiana, 1937, August the 30th.
And what were your parents' names and what did they do?
Russell Myers and Dorothy Myers. He was a carpenter at New Ross Lumber for about 40 some odd years.
And did you have any brothers and sisters?
I had one sister, Myrna Myers.
And as you grew up, where'd you go to grade school, high school?
Went to school at New Ross, Indiana, graduated in 1956. Came out of high school, went to work in construction, and then did some work at a place in Brownsburg by the name of Row Arts. Worked at a machine shop there. Went to Crawfordsville, R.R. Donnelly's, worked about 2 years there, and ended up starting to work for TWA of February of '59 at TWA.
February '59. And I want to jump right into TWA. Give me a little bit of background of things that you were involved with. Would you play sports when you were growing up? What type of?
As I was growing up, I played basketball, baseball, and track.
Okay. Now, did you go to college?
No, I did not.
Okay, so when you went into the workforce, obviously TWA is, the first international airline, and what was your motivation really even to go into that direction, and what was your skill set behind that to be able to help you go into that career?
Well, I went to work for TWA because I was renting a house from a guy that worked for TWA, John Stipe. John Stipe was a supervisor at Indianapolis for many years, and I told him that I was looking for a job, and he recommended TWA, and I hadn't even been to Indianapolis for very often as a child, as a kid growing up. So even going to the airport was a big deal for me. But I went over there, put in my application, and got hired.
You'd mentioned to me you worked in the ramp service, customer service, flight info, and you lived in Tucson as well as Indianapolis. So did you start out in ramp, or where'd you start?
I started out on the ramp, loading and unloading airplanes. It was a great job to have as far as I was concerned. I also got the flying privileges, and that was another thing I was looking forward to, was seeing the rest of the United States. I worked on the ramp for about 8 years, and I took the agent's job and became a customer service.
Well, before you go into customer service, let's talk about the ramp. So what were some of the major things you had to be concerned with physically, safety-wise, being out there? And what are some things that might have gone wrong out there?
Number one, you had to be able to adjust to the elements. I mean, you're talking about wind and snow, hail. I mean, if you thought, I lived on a farm, and I thought I knew what cold weather was like. Well, I didn't until I went to work at the airport. I mean, out there was nothing to slow the wind down. It came across, and it was back then, you really got hard winters around here.
Well, I'm assuming some of the planes, as they're coming in, that probably a lot of situations that almost went haywire. What's something that kind of stinks out?
Well, we were an alternate for Chicago, and we had an aircraft come into Indianapolis one time that could not get into Chicago, and it got down low enough that it got its landing gear entangled in electric wires. That's how low he was, and he diverted and came to Indianapolis. That's one of the things that I remember. I remember when he came in, the wires were wrapped around part of the fuselage still.
So it literally ripped the wires off the poles.
Ripped the wires right off. That's how low to the ground he was. That means he was within probably 100 feet of the ground, I would say, that or lower.
What about coming in without getting the gear down?
Well, he had the gear down. It didn't affect the gear, but the wires were still wrapped around there.
Did you happen to remember any other flights that came in and they couldn't get their landing gear down?
Oh yes, there was flights that couldn't get their landing gear down, and they would shoot approaches at the tower, and the tower would be out there with binoculars and telescopes to check and see if the landing gear was snapped down for landing. And now that wasn't just one time; that was a few times that happened. I mean, back in those days, you're talking about props. When I went to work for TWA in 1959, there was no jet aircraft at Indianapolis at all. And everything was props. We had 4-engine Connies, and then we had the Martins, and then of course the jets came in later.
So as you progressed on to customer service, I'm sure you still had some friends that from the ramp service scenarios.
My best friends were right there on the ramp. You take Bob Hammond, him and I are still friends today, but I had a lot of good friends. When I started on the ramp, I can't remember how many was on the roster, but there was several people that were good friends for a long time, but most of them are gone. We have a guy by the name of Dave Brown. He doesn't come to any of the meetings to speak of, but Dave was original on the ramp. The rest of them are gone or transferred out or quit. But it was quite an experience coming from a little small town where I did to work for TWA.
All right, so you went to work in customer service and then also flight info. What was your role technically for helping the customers? What were the top 3 or 4 bullets, things that you had to do to make sure they were?
Customer service was bringing the people to the ticket counter, writing their tickets. In those days, you would hand write the tickets. I mean, you're starting in and out. They always said if you could spell Albuquerque, then you were customer service. I can remember them saying that. Albuquerque was the longest one we had to write, but yeah, you would handwrite, call in Chicago, and get the reservations as to where they were going. I know I hadn't worked the ticket counter but just a short time when a guy came up and was wanting a round trip ticket to all the stations of TWA. I'm talking about around the world is what he wanted.
He wanted to go one to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next.
Okay, I went to a guy by the name of Fred Wickershide and told him, I said, Fred, this guy wants a round the world ticket. Fred said, okay, so he wrote the ticket. You had what we called a 4-leg ticket. 4 legs was 4 different stations on the ticket. And then you would go to another ticket and another ticket until you wrote them all out. Well, Fred said he would do it for me. And so he did. He went in the back room, was gone for quite some time, and he came out and he held the ticket up, and Fred was about 6'1", 6'2", and he held the ticket up, and when the tickets all came out for the whole thing, it reached the floor. So that was about 7 feet of tickets that had to be handwritten, spelled, didn't have to put the flight numbers in, didn't have to do any of that. On this ticket, you would put the flight number, the date, and the time of departure. And that's how you would handwrite it. Well, that takes a lot of time when you do it by hand. But Fred did the job.
So when you worked flight info, what were you trying to help? What was the actual position? What was
Flight
the
information was you made all the estimates of the arrival of a flight, and of course the departure was scheduled, and you had a blackboard that you would handwrite it. Well, later on, they got the TVs in as to where they would be different parts of the airport, and there was a felt strip that you put the flight numbers, the arrival and the departure, And you would slide that in and it would be shown over the airport. That was I'm talking about ancient times. This was when airlines started progressing a little bit more. And it was, when I started out with TWA, everything was prop, and then the jet age came and everything changed.
TWA was one of the main technology companies for aviation to implement a lot of really new forward-thinking solutions. What are some of those things that you think really jumped them to that next level? And also, how do you think they really earned the spot to become the first international?
TWA was the largest air carrier in Indianapolis for many years. We were in competition with other airlines, but we were the biggest. And service in those days was what brought people back. The service. The prices were regulated. Everybody charged the same price from point A to point B at the beginning. And then came deregulation. And when deregulation came in, then came your cutthroat of undermining the other carrier and competition, you know. The only thing you had was service, and we gave the service.
What do you think is one of the most influential pieces of technology or Doppler radar or things that they really implemented that really helped them get to that international level, or working with the military? Like, what were some of those physical things that they actually created to help them bridge that to those larger organizations and go international?
TWA was, as far as I was concerned, was ahead of everybody in everything that we did. We went above the people that were in command of TWA at that time. They were looking to progress that airline as far as it could possibly go, showing people. I mean, we had the Connies. The Connies were the top of the line at that time. They really offered a lot for the people. But you're talking about primitive times. I mean, we progressed from 2 engines to 4 engines to the jet age, and we were right in on the ground floor. I mean, everything that TWA did not only helped TWA, it helped other airlines. They did. They were ahead of all the other airlines as far as I'm concerned.
All right, so you moved to was it Tucson? Is that right? Tell me some experiences about being out in Tucson with the company, with on the job and then also off the job, of enjoying that area and people you met.
I transferred to Tucson in 77 and 78. I went out to Tucson, Arizona. I just wanted a change of atmosphere and everything, and so I went to Tucson. And getting there, that was the beginning of a shortage of gasoline. I can remember that in those days there was ration. You could only get gas on certain days in Tucson, Arizona. And the night that I pulled into Tucson, Arizona, the whole city was dark. The streetlights, they had turned the streetlights out to conserve energy. And that was an experience in itself. When you drive into a huge city and not a street light around, they had no street lights. They turned them all out. But I stopped at the airport and introduced myself to the people that were on the ticket counter. And there was a guy by the name of Ted Cannell was there, and another guy by the name of Warren, I can't think of his last name right now, but I introduced myself to them. They told me where to go to get a rental property. I needed someplace to stay, so they told me about a trailer court that was a short distance from the airport. Went over there the next day, rented a trailer and set up housekeeping right there in Tucson. I mean, when you go into a new station where you know nobody and it's altogether different, I mean, it is an experience. But they opened their arms up to me and made me feel at home real quick. I enjoyed working there.
What about getting out in the desert?
Getting out.
What
in
are
the
some
desert,
stories
it's like
about
it's
going
like
out with the
going on a
guys?
Picnic. Around here, you go to a park to go to a picnic, and it's green and grass and everything. Out there in Tucson, you're talking about rocks, you're talking about stone, you're talking about desert, you're talking about 105 degrees. It was not uncommon out there.
Scorpions.
And scorpions and rattlesnakes. I heard all kinds of stories. But the 2 years I was out there, and I was out in the what I call the boondocks quite a bit, because I had Tuesdays and Wednesdays, or Wednesdays and Thursdays off, and nobody else had those days off. So I'd go to the mountains, but I'd yet to see a scorpion or a rattlesnake out in the wild. But I didn't get out there till 10 o'clock in the morning. And anybody with any sense, that's when they're heading for cooler weather. They're heading for a shelter of rock or something to get out of the sun. But that was my experience in Tucson. It was a beautiful experience out there. I remember there was movie stars out there. I had I was working the ticket counter, and Jimmy Stewart played in a lot of westerns, came up in front of me, and his voice just sounded like it does on the movies, you know. And it was an experience. I had to write Jimmy Stewart's ticket for him and put him on the flight. It was a great experience out there.
So who were some of the other people that throughout the years became some of your closest friends, just working with them, and what's some great memories at work and also off work, you know, traveling or just spending time together?
Well, I happen to remember this other guy that was working the ticket counter that night. His name was Warren Harsh, and he was from Germany, little short guy, and he was a good friend of mine. I'd go over to his house and drink beer and eat sardines and talk about different things, but he was a great, there was also a guy out there by the name of McGroby, Alfred McGroby. He was from Egypt, I believe, but he could speak 7 languages. This guy, it didn't make any difference who came in the door, no matter what language, he could understand them, and he could speak with them. He was a big influence on me as far as customer service. Alfred showed me a lot. He really did. He was a great person to be around.
Who were some of the other mentors that, you know, they took you under their wing, pardon the pun?
Oh, it was.
But who are some of the other mentors that you like to mention, and what were some situations you had with them?
There was out of Tucson, there was other people, I can't think of their names, it's been too many years, but they showed you a lot out there, told you, as soon as I got out there in Tucson, Arizona, I had a staph infection on my hand. I woke up one morning, I couldn't close my hand, it was swollen that much. And of course I went to the hospital. That's where the people out there recommended me to go, say go to the hospital, to the emergency. And I did, and I had staph infection, and that was an experience. It was anybody that's had staph, you know that it's painful. I had it under my arms. That's where it settled, under my arms, and I had it for quite a while out there, and missed work a few times because of it. But I finally got over it. There was a lot of people that I've come into contact with that has helped me a lot. Here in Indianapolis, when I worked here, we had a guy by the name of Glenn Denton. He was the one that trained me for operations and also just being a good friend. Glenn was right up until the end. He was a good friend. We had other people that worked for TWA that also influenced me a lot. But Glenn Denton was top of the line as far as I was concerned. He was a gentleman. He knew his job, and that taught me a lot.
All right, so for the museum and also the hotel in New York, Have you been able to visit either?
Oh, yes, the museum in Kansas City, I've been there several times. Greg Tyler, I got introduced to Greg back here at Indianapolis. He came to one of our TWA get-togethers, and he was from Kansas City. No one knew him, and when he walked in and had a TWA park on, Greg and I became real good friends. Why? I don't know. There's such a difference in our age. I mean, I'm 25 years older than Greg is, but yet I hold Greg as a true friend.
So obviously the museum has a lot of history within it. What would you say are some major benchmark scenarios that happened with TWA that really kind of stand out to you, historical moments that happened while you worked there?
While I worked at Indianapolis here at TWA, we had the presidents coming in on TWA. That's for sure. And I was working the ramp at the time. And it was a 707, it took water injection for takeoff. And I was driving the water truck up to this presidential airplane. Now the Secret Service had been in town for over a week setting everything up. You had to quarantine the fuel truck, quarantine the water truck. All of this had to be inspected before they would let it up to that aircraft that the president was in. Well, this water truck that I was driving had a foot feed on the floor that was broken, and if it slipped off, it would backfire. Well, I'm driving this water truck up to the aircraft for the president, and my foot slipped off the foot feed, and it backfired and sounded like a gun going off. The Secret Service, I never saw so many people come out of places in my life as to when the president came in. And I can understand why.
Did you put your hand out the window and wave and say sorry?
The guy was right beside of me.
Who's right beside you?
The Secret Service was right. He said, "What in the hell was that?" And I told him, I said, "This thing backfires." He said, "Boy, you brought a lot of attention." And I did. I looked around and there was Secret Service all over the place.
Did you ever remember any race car drivers coming into town?
Oh yeah, there was race car drivers all the time coming in. We brought the race cars in on the freighter, and that's before you had any way of any only thing we had was a forklift to get that race car up in the air about 30 feet. And it was a challenge to get that race car down safe. Of course, when we got it on the ground, first thing guys wanted to do was get in the race car and have their picture taken. And that was something to see too. But yeah, race car drivers and race cars, we had them coming in all the time.
Did you ever get injured on the job? Did anything ever happen to you when you got hurt?
Oh yeah, I was fueling at the time. Now this is a Constellation where you fueled on the wing, and you would drive the truck underneath the wing of the aircraft. There was usually two of us, and the meter, of course, was on the truck. I would be up on the wing, and this one morning, it was a morning that we had some ice on the wing, and I didn't realize, you can't see the ice. It's invisible. You just don't see it. It all blends in. Well, I get up there on the wing and get the nozzle in the hole, and all of a sudden my feet start going out underneath me, and I'm sliding down the wing of a Connie, and I hit the fuselage, bounce around, and put my feet over the edge. And as I go over the edge of the wing, the trailing edge of the wing, you're about 8 feet off the ground. And I dropped 8 feet and hit the ground. It shook me up quite a bit. I went home for a while, but I snapped out of it. It didn't bother me permanently. But dropping off that wing, not everybody does that. and to do it without breaking your neck. See, it could have been head first, and that would have been the end of it probably. But I did have enough sense to get on my rear end and slide down on that.
Okay, so you also were able to enjoy the perks and travel a little bit, I'm sure.
Oh, I traveled.
Where's like your top 3 places you went to that were bucket list or scenarios that you got to utilize that benefit?
San Francisco was the top of the line. That's where I would always take my father on trips, and the first place he wanted to go was San Francisco, and we would make the trip to San Francisco twice a year for several years. And San Francisco was a beautiful city at that time. I mean, clean. You couldn't ask for a city to see it today, see all the homeless and everything is out there. It's heart-wrenching because that city was a beautiful, beautiful city at that time. You take the cable cars, the Golden Gate Bridge, the Oakland Bay Bridge. I've walked across them. I walked across the Golden Gate Bridge 3 times, and that's an experience. The first time was with my father, and the last time was with my daughter. But I've taken them both out there and enjoyed the scenery and everything. And the Golden Gate Bridge is a lot of history there. I can remember it was built the same year I was born, 1937. That's what I can remember.
So you and your wife, his name is Chris, is that correct?
Yes, Chris.
And you've got 3 kids that are yours, 2 that you adopted, Teddy, Terry, Tammy, and Jen and John. So did you take family vacations and
Yes,
utilize the perks
all
of?
my kids on
What's one of the best family places you guys went together?
The one that I remember the most is when I took my children, my blood children, and we went to Colorado. We were in Colorado for, I can't remember how long, but quite a spell, and rented a car, drove around, got to see the sights. I remember we were out there close to the 4th of July because you could still make snowballs up in the mountains and throw snowballs. I can remember doing that, but had a lot of good times with the kids. And then my adopted children, I took them out to San Francisco and drove up to the redwoods through the drive-through tree. Got to see all that. The biggest tree in the world.
The sequoia.
The sequoia trees out there. And anybody that has not been out to see them, it is a sight to see.
Well, something that's a little touchy, but there's scenarios throughout your entire career that you hear of tragedy happening and plane going down and whatnot. So, like for instance, one of the major ones was Flight 800. But where were you when you remember that happening, and what went through your head when it went down?
Flight 800, when it went down, I was at home at the time and heard it on TV that a flight, and for what they said that it caused it, which was a spark in the fuel tank, is a no-no. I mean, there is no way that could ever happen. Now that's my opinion, and it is. I've read books about it and everything, and they still say it was friendly fire, and I'm have to agree.
Right.
This Greg Tyler knows more about it than I do. This guy knows all about it, and he knows that the aircraft, he knows all about it. But he said there was no way that spark could ever happen in that fuel tank.
Right. All right. So as far as an overall look back to your career with TWA, what do you think it really gave you, gave your family, and what do you think you really got out of it?
My family and myself, we got to see places that no way in the world would I have ever been able to see it without it. TWA has taken me from the East Coast, the West Coast, to Hawaii, to Milan, Italy. I've been to all of them, all the different places. I didn't travel into Europe like I always wanted to, but I got to see all the United States. There's very few shots on TV that I haven't been there. You take out in Arizona, I've been to Grand Canyon, I've been all over Arizona. You see these westerns with old towns, and I can say I've been there. I have been there.
All right, so it's on a lighter note. What's some of your more funny situations you remember happening with employees on the job? Any of those that really stand out that you want to mention?
Like I say, I can go down the roster, and every one of them, there's a story behind it. I've been to a lot of people's houses. I make a pest of myself. That's what I call myself. I call myself a pest because I feel like I'm a pest to them. I check you. Any death, I usually try to go to. I've been to a lot of deaths with TWA people, and they're like brothers and sisters to me. It's like Sandy was here today. And she's talking about when she came to work for TWA, working in air freight. I can remember her doing that. I can remember her becoming a ground hostess. A great story about Sandy was that this star in the paper, the Star paper, they put out a magazine on Sunday, and her picture is on the front page of that star. And Sandy is kind of bashful at times that she doesn't want to make up anything big, but that was a big thing for anybody that you know that was on the front of the Star page book. That's quite an accomplishment, and Sandy's picture is there. And this album that we've got today, there's a actual picture of that in that album. That's one thing that she should be proud of it. She doesn't want to really bring any attention to herself, but that was a great thing for anyone to have.
Okay, so in closing, what would you like to say to your wife as far as her supporting you all these years and going, down the road of you working with TWA, and also what would you like to say to any other alumni employees out there about your overall experience?
Well, TWA is like a big family. I've told my wife that many times. We have traveled a little bit as far as flying. I still get the flying privileges with American Airlines. I can go anywhere in the world, but Chris doesn't like to fly that often, and the way the situations are now, I'm hesitant in doing any of it, so we don't fly like we could. But whenever there is a meeting or a get-together or a death, I usually try to attend. And I haven't missed too many of them. I would never ever regret working for TWA because it's a great group of people, both all management, ramp, maintenance. It didn't make any difference. We're all in this together. And that's about all I got to say.
All right. Well, thank you for sharing. I know the other alumni and your family will love being able to have this, and also you give a lot of people a lot of props for what they were for you over your career, and I'm sure that their families like to hear that as well. And I thank you for your time, Larry. I know this has been a nice luncheon. We did some stories earlier with the other alum, but I look forward to helping save the others' memories as well. And I thank you.
Thank you.
You got it.